Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking at something pretty intense brewing just off the coast of South America. It looks like a counter-drug op on the surface, but it feels like a geopolitical flashpoint.
It really does. It's definitely more than just a simple drug war. The stakes are climbing and fast. We're seeing a real escalation in U.S. kinetic actions, lethal force in the Southern Caribbean.
Yeah.
We're specifically looking at the 5th and 6th lethal strikes, which happened very recently between October 14th and 16th.
And the facts from those couple of days are, well, they're stark. We know these strikes killed at least 8 people. And that last strike, October 16th, that one hit a semi-submersible vessel.
That's right.
And it resulted in 2 survivors being detained, actually held right now on a U.S. warship.
Exactly. And that detention piece, that's key, because now you're into a whole new layer of legal stuff, diplomatic maneuvering.
Right.
And just 2 days ago, October 18th, the U.S. announced those survivors are being repatriated, sent back to Colombia and Ecuador.
Which really shifts this whole thing, doesn't it? From just stopping boats to something much closer to, well, the law of armed conflict.
Precisely. And that brings us to the core conflict here, the narratives.
Yeah.
You've got the U.S. framing its actions legally, targeting organized crime. They specifically mentioned Tren de Aragua, that Venezuelan group. And they're doing it within this framework of a declared non-international armed conflict.
While Caracas, predictably, calls it unlawful aggression, says it's a violation of their sovereignty.
Immediately, yeah.
So our mission today, for you listening, is really critical. We need to unpack the legal side the U.S. is using, figure out the geopolitical and geographical drivers here. Why now? Why this escalation?
And analyze that risk. The risk of miscalculation seems,
U.S.
pretty
President
high.
Donald Trump on Tuesday
And we need to
posted
pinpoint the
footage
key
on
indicators.
Truth
What
Social
should we all be
showing a
watching over the
boat
next,
being
say,
struck by
30
a
days to see where this
projectile and
heads?
exploding.
So let's maybe
The
start with a
video followed
timeline.
US
Put these
military
recent
strike
strikes in
of
context.
Venezuela's coast
Good
the
idea.
same day,
Because,
which
like you
Trump
said, these
said
kinetic
killed
strikes,
6
they didn't just
suspected
pop up
drug
out of blue. There was a
traffickers.
buildup.
In the Post,
A
he
U.S.
claimed
naval
the boat
buildup
was
starting
linked
late
to a
summer,
terrorist
right then in
group
the Southern
involved
Caribbean.
in drug
Okay.
trafficking,
But the pace,
offered
it
no
really
evidence.
picked up speed
It's the
dramatically
latest
in
a series
mid-October.
of US
You had the 5th
operations in the
strike on the
region.
14th,
As
killing
Washington
6.
steps up
Then
its
boom, 2
military
days later,
presence
the
there.
6th strike
The
hits
Pentagon
that
recently told
semi-submersible.
Congress
The one with
that
the
Trump
survivors.
considers
The one with the
US
survivors,
to be
yeah.
in a non-international
Leading to those first
armed
detentions,
conflict with
that
drug
tight
cartels.
window, October
Some former
14th to
military
16th,
lawyers
it
argue
shows
the
a
legal
really
case for
rapid
killing
operational
and not
tempo.
capturing
And this
suspected
kind of tempo,
traffickers at sea
especially one
doesn't
that
accord
results
with
in
the law of
detaining
war.
people, it
The
absolutely
US is
has to have a
expanding its
solid
military
legal
presence
foundation,
in the
right?
Southern
So for someone
Caribbean,
listening who
in
isn't,
addition to
steeped in
F-35
international
aircraft in
law,
Puerto Rico,
why
deployed
can the
forces
U.S. suddenly
include 8
use lethal
warships
force
with
like this,
thousands of
outside its
sailors in
territory, against what look like smugglers? What changed legally to make this happen now?
Yeah, that's the absolute heart of it. This authority, it comes from a mix of specific legal and political policy decisions. Really, 2 crucial moves by the U.S. First, designating certain groups, including Venezuelan networks like Tren de Aragua, as foreign terrorist organizations, FTOs, or SDGTs, specially designated global terrorists.
Okay, hang on. FTO, SDGT. For the average listener, what does calling a criminal gang an FTO actually do in this situation? How does that unlock lethal force?
It's the linchpin. These labels, FTO, SDGT, they essentially mark these groups as, high-priority state enemies. That designation then gets paired with the declaration of a non-international armed conflict, or NIAC.
NIX, okay.
That's the legal switcheroo. NIXE basically lets the U.S. operate under the law of armed conflict against these non-state groups, even if they aren't, say, ISIS or al-Qaeda.
So wait, instead of standard policing rules where you try to arrest someone or only use deadly force if you're directly threatened,
Right, law enforcement rules of engagement.
they can now basically treat these cartel boats as if they were, well, military targets. That's a whole different ballgame.
It is a fundamentally different ballgame. Under law enforcement, lethal force is your absolute last resort. Under NISC, if U.S. intelligence says, okay, that vessel has people from a designated FTO or SDGT group, and they're involved in hostile acts or supporting them, then
Then they have a legal justification to use force. Proportional force, presumably.
proportional force, yes, to stop it. This opens the door for kinetic strikes in situations where before you'd be looking at a really complex, probably non-lethal interdiction attempt, boarding actions, things like that.
Which means we really have to see this not just as stopping drugs, but as a deliberate pressure campaign against the Maduro regime in Caracas.
Exactly right. If you connect the dots, look the bigger picture. The calculus here seems to be regime pressure, pushing Maduro, not, prepping for an invasion.
U.S. military
It's
carried
about
out
raising
another
the cost
strike
for
on
his
the
inner circle,
Venezuelan
hitting
drug
his
cartel
security
vessel
people,
that was
his
on its way to
partners,
the United
using
States.
legal levers,
The second
financial
such strike
ones,
against a
and,
suspected drug
psychological
boat in
pressure,
recent
too.
weeks.
And speaking of
Trump's
financial
post
and
on social
psychological
media
levers,
included a video
there was
which
that
appeared
huge
to show a
reward
vessel in a
mentioned in
body
our
of water
sources. That seems
exploding.
pretty specific.
Venezuela's
absolutely.
government in the
Can't
past
ignore the
accused the
$50
U.S.
million
of AI
reward the
manipulation.
State Department has
Reuters
out there,
conducted initial checks
specifically
on the
related
video
to
with an
Maduro
AI
himself.
detection
50
tool,
million.
but the video
Yeah.
was partly
And
blurred,
this isn't just,
making it
standard bounty
impossible to
hunting. It's a
confirm
very
if the video
targeted
was
signal,
manipulated.
trying to
Hours
fracture
before
his
the
support
post,
network.
President
It
Nicolas
increases the
Maduro said the
psychological
recent
risk for
incidents
anyone
were an
close to
aggression
him.
by the
His
U.S.
generals,
No
his
es
security
una
chiefs.
tensión.
It dangles
This
this
is
huge
intention.
sum,
It is an aggression
tempting
all
defection,
down
or
the
maybe
line.
betrayal,
It is
especially
judicial
for those already
aggression when
feeling
they
the pinch from
criminalize
sanctions,
us.
and now
It
maybe
is
worried about
political
being targeted
aggression with their
themselves.
So it's
daily
using
threatening
greed
statements.
and fear.
It
at
is
the same
both
time.
diplomatic and
Military
military
signaling
aggression.
plus a massive bounty,
Y es una
while
agresión
keeping the
en
ultimate
camino
goal, what they
de
actually want
carácter
Maduro to
militar.
do,
Y
kind of
Venezuela
ambiguous,
coercion in
Venezuela is
action.
empowered
Yeah.
by
which makes the
international law to
operational
confront
environment
this
to where
aggression
really
comprehensively.
fascinating. If
Yeah.
you have this
It is
broad
not tension,
anti-acting
it is
authority to use
aggression.
force, but
No
the
es una
political aim is
tensión,
pressure
es una
without
agresión.
starting a
A
state-on-state
U.S.
shooting
military
match.
strike on
Yeah.
September
They must
2nd
be
killed
incredibly
11
careful about
people
where
and
they
sank
take
a
these
boat
shots.
from
Right.
So
Venezuela.
let's shift to the map,
Despite
the maritime
demands from
geography.
U.S.
Where is
Congress
this
members
actually
that the
happening?
government justify
Okay,
the
so
action,
the U.S. is
the Trump
focusing on those
administration has
known
provided
trafficking
scant
corridors.
information about
The
the attack.
routes used
The
to push drugs
Venezuelan
out from
government has said none
Venezuela.
of
And the geography there, it's tricky. You've got the ABC Islands arc, Aruba, Bonaire, Curacao, classic transshipment spots, right close to Venezuela, have infrastructure.
Right, and those islands sit very close to Venezuela's exclusive economic zone, their EEZ.
Very close. Then you've also got heavy activity around the Gulf of Korea between Venezuela and Trinidad.
Now the president
and
is
critically,
applying
the
even
Mona
more
Passage
pressure,
between
saying
Puerto
he's
Rico and the
authorized
Dominican
the
Republic and that
CIA to
southern
conduct
DR
covert
corridor down near
operations
Isla
in the
Beata.
South American country.
The operational
Yeah,
challenge,
authorized
the
for two
constraint,
reasons,
is that the U.S. needs
Number
what they
one,
call
they
interdiction
have emptied their
standoff.
prisons into the
They have to
United
operate
States of
plausibly
America. And a lot of
outside
the
Venezuelan
Venezuelan drugs
territorial
come in
waters,
through the
probably
sea.
in
Earlier
international
this
waters.
month, the
Why?
Trump
To
administration
back up their
declared
legal
the
claims?
U.S.
Yes,
is in
partly
armed
legal claims and
conflict
partly
with
to
drug
avoid giving
cartels,
Caracas an easy
allowing the
excuse to
president
cry
to
invasion
conduct these
and trigger a
strikes.
direct response from
But
the
there are
Venezuelan
mounting
Navy or
questions
Coast
about that
Guard.
authority.
So the
The
geography
debate
and the
is,
legal
are
strategy
these
are
drug
completely
traffickers,
intertwined.
Should they be treated like
Get close enough
criminals,
to catch the
or are they
smugglers,
terrorists?
but
Are
stay
they
far enough
enemy
away to
combatants?
avoid a direct
Venezuelan
confrontation
officials say
with the
the
Venezuelan
strikes are
state.
not about
That is the
drugs,
razor's
that the
edge
US
they're
ultimately
walking.
wants
And
to
the
take
targets
control
themselves, I mean,
of their
that
country's
semi-submersible
oil
they hit on the
resources.
16th, those
Lawmakers on
narco
Capitol
subs,
Hill are
they're built to
split
be
over the
nearly
president's
invisible.
actions.
Low profile.
Extremely low profile. Hitting one takes high-end, real-time intel, which means relying on very expensive, very classified sensors and surveillance.
So
And that
far,
reliance
all
on
of the
classified
strikes have been
intel,
in
that's where the
international
credibility
waters.
challenge
But
comes in,
President
isn't
Trump
it? We have
says he is
some
not
confirmed
ruling out
pieces, but also
striking
big gaps,
inside
which lets
Venezuela.
Caracas push its counter
In
narrative.
Washington,
Exactly.
Lucas
What's
Tomlinson,
crucial is the
KTVU,
corroboration we do
Fox
have.
2
You mentioned
News.
regional partners, the
government
Dominican
shut down
Republic
the center.
specifically. They publicly recovered a lot of cocaine from at least one of these destroyed boats.
Okay, so physical evidence.
Physical evidence. That lends real weight to the U.S. claim that, yes, they're actually hitting major drug shipments. They're not just, randomly sinking fishing boats.
But the gaps are still significant. We, the public, we don't see the specific targeting intelligence. We often don't know who exactly was on the crew, their affiliations. And crucially, the exact position of these vessels when they were hit relative to that Venezuelan EEZ line. That's not publicly verified.
And that lack of public verification, that's the space Venezuela rushes to fill, which leads us right back to that core narrative battle. The U.S. pushes the state criminal nexus idea that these drug flows are tied directly into Maduro-aligned networks.
Right.
Caracas hits back by mobilizing militias, pumping out nationalist propaganda, claiming sovereignty violations. It's information warfare playing out alongside actual kinetic strikes.
Which brings us squarely to looking forward, the risk assessment. How do we track the danger of miscalculation over the next month or so, given this really charged atmosphere?
Yeah, we need to shift from looking back to looking ahead. Based on everything we're seeing, the force posture, the political signals, we think it's highly likely the U.S. keeps this going.
Stays the course.
Stays the course, yeah.
Yeah.
We're putting that probability somewhere in the, let's say, 75 to 92% range. A continued low-tempo campaign. Maybe 2 to 5 strikes a month. Enough to keep the pressure on, but trying very hard to avoid direct, overt clashes with actual Venezuelan military boats or planes.
Pressure, not open conflict.
Yeah.
Got it. But when you have warships and patrol boats operating so close together, and the rhetoric is so hostile, It just feels like somebody's going to bump into somebody else eventually.
It feels likely, doesn't it? We rate the chance of at least one maritime safety incident or maybe a diplomatic blow-up as likely, say, 55 to 74% probability.
What kind of incident?
Could be anything from a U.S. destroyer having a near miss with a Venezuelan patrol boat, tense maneuvering in tight waters. Or it could be more diplomatic, a sharp protest note, maybe expelling some embassy staff from allied countries in the region. The density of forces in those narrow sea lanes just makes these kinds of incidents quite probable.
And the fallout isn't just military or diplomatic, is it? You mentioned migration earlier, that this instability could affect migration flows.
Yes, absolutely. Security shocks, policy uncertainty. They ripple outwards fast. We see a likely scenario, again, probably in that 55-74% range, where migration
Venezuela
patterns
this
become
week
more volatile.
that the White House
Not necessarily
alleges was
a huge
carrying
increase in
narcotics
total
bound
numbers,
for the
but
U.S.
shifts in routes.
Both in his first term
sorry.
and
Traffickers
his
and
current
migrants
one, the
themselves
president and
are
his team have
adaptable.
made
They'll
clear
react
they
to the
want
perceived
Venezuelan
risk.
President
So you
Nicolas
might
Maduro
see shifts away
out
from
of
certain
power.
areas, maybe more
And now
movement
Mr.
around
Trump has
Trinidad
raised
or
the
increased use of
prospect
the
of
Mona
striking
Passage, maybe
Venezuela
even
on
toward the
land.
Florida Straits, as they try to find safer paths in this unpredictable environment.
After strike
Okay, so
in
let's
the
game out the
Caribbean
worst
Sea,
case. If
targeting
the objective
small
is to
boats
avoid
allegedly carrying
state-on-state
illegal
fighting,
drugs and headed to
what's
the
the
U.S.
nightmare scenario?
Since
What's
early
the single
September,
trigger that
5
could flip
such
this whole
U.S.
situation
military
overnight?
strikes,
The
4 of
absolute
them
most
on
dangerous
boats from
scenario.
Venezuela.
It comes down to
This week,
misidentification,
an
what the
escalation.
military calls
We are
a
certainly looking at
mis-ID.
land now
The
because
trigger
we've got
is
the
a
sea
U.S.
very well
strike
under
hitting
control.
something they think
With
is a
President Trump
high-value cartel
confirming
target.
yesterday
Like
that
another
the CIA
semi-submersible.
is
Right,
conducting
but it turns out
covert
to be
operations inside
a Venezuelan
Venezuela.
state vessel,
I
maybe
authorized
a
for
Coast
two
Guard
reasons,
cutter, a
really.
patrol boat, or
Number
even
one,
worse,
they have
politically and
emptied their
humanly,
prisons
a
into
boat
the
full
United
of
States of
ordinary
America. And the other thing
Venezuelan
of drugs, we have a lot of drugs
Wow.
coming in from
Okay.
Venezuela.
If
And a
that
lot of the
red line
Venezuelan
gets
drugs
crossed
come in
an
through the
accidental
sea.
hit
It's
on
an
a
expansion of what the
Venezuelan state
Pentagon has called
asset
a
or citizens,
counternarcotics and
what happens
counterterrorism
next?
mission.
What's the
An
escalation
armada
pathway we
of
should
U.S.
watch?
warships already
If that
deployed
trigger
off the
gets
Venezuelan
pulled,
coast.
Venezuela's reaction
and
would likely be
B-52 bombers
immediate
to nearby
and
international
severe.
airspace.
You'd probably see them
Not
scramble
fire.
patrol boats, maybe put coastal missile batteries on
bits.
higher alert.
A
They'd almost
defiant
certainly
President
start
Nicolas
harassing
Maduro
U.S. or allied
responded to
ships
Trump's
and
remarks
planes
yesterday.
operating nearby.
So
No
indicators.
to
regime change.
What are the specific
No to
signs
CIA
we or you
orchestrated
listeners
coup
should
d'etat.
look for?
Latin
The technical
America
warning
does not
signs.
want them,
Reports of
does not
Venezuelan
need
radar
them,
locking
and
on or
repudiates them.
illuminating U.S. or
In a
allied
statement,
aircraft or
Venezuela's
ships.
foreign minister
Illumination,
said the
you mean like
escalation
targeting
seeks to
radar, painting the
legitimize
target.
regime
Exactly.
change
It's a
with
hostile
the
act,
ultimate
a
aim
step
of
just
seizing
before
Venezuela's
firing.
oil
We should also
resources.
watch for sudden new warnings
For
from
years,
Caracas restricted
Venezuela's
airspace
economy
zones
has been in
or
free
warnings
fall.
closing off
An
parts of
estimated
international waters.
80% of
That would be a
residents live
huge
in poverty,
signal. A
and
sign
nearly
that the
8
threshold's been
million
crossed
people
and a
have
shooting
fled
incident has
Maduro's
gone
regime.
from unlikely
He
to
was
potentially
sworn in for
imminent.
his third
Okay, so let's
term
try to bring
earlier
these
this
threads
year,
together.
despite
The
evidence he
U.S.
lost
is using this
re-election by a
powerful,
landslide.
maybe controversial legal tool,
Just last
NIS,
week, one of Maduro's
to conduct
fiercest
strikes.
foes, Maria
The
Corina
goal seems to be
Machado,
maximum
won the
pressure
Nobel
on
Peace
Maduro's
Prize.
circle,
The
short
opposition
of
leader
war,
who lives in hiding
while
has
trying
spoken
very
in favor
carefully
of outside
to stay out of
intervention in
Venezuelan
Venezuela.
waters.
Right.
After her win,
And Caracas
Machado
is
dedicated
hitting
the
back
prize
hard
to
with
President
rhetoric,
Trump
nationalism,
for his, quote,
but probably
decisive
wants to
support of our
avoid a
cause.
direct naval fight. They almost certainly
Late
can't
today,
win.
Secretary of
fragile
Defense
balance
Pete
seems to be
Hegseth
the key
announced
thing
that the
we're
naval
watching.
officer
And
in
regional
charge of
diplomacy
U.S.
plays a huge
operations
role
for
here.
Latin
A massive
America
role. You
would
have
leave by
key
the
neighbors
end of
like Colombia and
2025.
Ecuador who are just trying
Admiral
to stay out of
Alvin
the line of
Halsey
fire,
will end a
basically. And now they have to deal
37-year
with
career
processing these two
after less than a
detainees being
year in
sent back.
charge
Right.
of U.S. Southern
Meanwhile, partners like the Dominican Republic are crucial for the U.S. strategy. Their willingness to cooperate on operations and maybe more importantly, to publicly show the drugs they seize from these wrecks. That really helps legitimize the U.S. counter-narcotics narrative.
And even with all this tension, a direct kinetic clash, U.S. versus Venezuela, is still rated unlikely for the next month, around 25 to 44% chance.
That's our assessment for now, yes. Unlikely. But that assessment hinges entirely on not having that mis-ID incident we talked about.
It all comes down to accurate targeting.
Accurate targeting, high-end intelligence, and really disciplined operations under immense pressure. The stability is, let's say, tenuous.
Which raises one final critical question for you to think about. We focused a lot on escalation risk. But what about de-escalation? Are there any off-ramps here? Any back channels? Is there like a deconfliction hotline maybe run through regional navies or a third country stepping in?
That's the crucial unknown, isn't it?
Because if those off-ramps don't exist, or if they fail when that inevitable near miss or minor incident does happen, that's when things could spiral. A kinetic exchange could go from unlikely to happening very, very quickly. So the question really is, what single human error, what misstep, could turn this targeted operation against cartels into a dangerous state-on-state standoff? That's what hangs over the Southern Caribbean right now.